to record. I think okay, got it.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining tonight's the Georgia TESOL Professional Learning Series. So my name is Dr. Brian Hibbs. I'm a professor of education at Dalton State College, and thank you so much for being here for this session of the Dr. Elizabeth Webb Professional Learning Series. So we usually have a couple of sessions each month on a Thursday, twice a month, on a variety of different topics with the intent of addressing different populations and different stakeholder populations related to the TESOL world. So sometimes we have sessions more focused on strategies about teaching and learning, multilingual learners of English. We have some sessions dedicated to administering and directing either ESOL programs or ESOL teacher education programs. We have some sessions tonight that are dedicated to adult education and ways to engage in the community. And we also have some sessions dedicated to more of higher education. So ESOL educator preparation programs, et cetera. And so, and so this evening we have with us, we're very happy to have with us Dr. Drew Fagan. He is a clinical professor of applied linguistics and language education at the University of Maryland and director and developer of the state's first EDD in school system leadership program with a specialization in TESOL and dual language education. Quite a mouthful. Dr. Fagan works closely with policymakers in the Maryland legislature, the Maryland State Department of Education, and the Maryland Higher Education Commission to enact change in laws, teacher certification policies, public school assessment, and accountability standards, and higher education programming related to multilingual learners' equitable access to education. He was the 2022/2023 president of the Maryland TESOL Association, where he co-developed and was the initial coordinator of the statewide mentorship program for professionals in the TESOL field. And he was the 2023 Teacher of the Year for the TESOL International Association and National Geographic Learning. And so his session tonight is entitled Intersecting Teaching, Research, and Policymaking in TESOL, a Practical Approach. So Dr. Fagan, over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me just bring up my information here. It is a pleasure to be talking with everyone a little further south than where I am right now. Greetings from the University of Maryland. I'm about 3 miles outside of Washington, D.C. at the moment, and it's always a pleasure talking with people from all areas of our field and just getting a sense of different backgrounds that people have in coming into the field, why they came into the teaching English speakers of other languages or multilingual learner education or bilingual education or dual language education or whatever term applies to you, this field. What is it that you're doing in the field? And the possibilities that you see for the field moving forward. And it's that last part that really connects to the talk that I want to give today. This notion of policymaking. It's been around for a while. It's something that many people have talked about. It's discussed often in our field when we're talking about equity, justice, making sure that our multilingual learners of English have their needs met in order to be able to have academic achievement in the content areas, in addition to language proficiency to help them succeed in whatever they're trying to do. And this crosses P12, adult, higher education settings, and all types of schooling. But often I hear from different types of educators, and I use the word educator very, very specifically because I'm referring to teachers, but I'm also referring to teaching assistants, paraprofessionals, counselors, social workers, specialists, front office staff, directors, administrators. I incorporate everyone into this word educator because that is a fact. All these people are educators in some way affecting the success of our multilingual learners. I often hear from educators saying, My focus is on teaching or administration or assisting or tutoring. My focus is on second language acquisition, grammar, vocabulary, connecting language with content areas, preparing my students to be able to go to the grocery store or the post office. My work maybe is on research. I want to focus on the next perspective of second language acquisition. I'm dissecting discourse in classroom. But many people stop short when it comes to policymaking in our field. And I find that to be fascinating because policymaking directly connects to advocacy. And as we're going to see, advocacy in the 2024 world is at the center of our field. So as we proceed, first of all, for everyone who is out there, I'm going to be referring to a lot of references, and a lot of these references, I actually have URL links for you to do. So if you want to click on this right now, you can actually directly get access to all the references that I will be showing throughout the talk. And so you can actually follow along if you want to click on the URLs just to see what the people are saying, just have a better idea of what this is. And if more people come in over time, I also will have this at the very end. And if you also want more information about me, you can also find it at this QR code. I want to start off, and I'm also very mindful of the timing that we have right now, realizing that we don't have a very, very long time to be able to do a lot of what I would love to be able to accomplish today. I want to reflect, first of all. Very, very short amount of reflection right now, but I do want to reflect. When you think about where you are right now in terms of your job in the field of TESOL, what is my official position? What is your title that you have? With that title, what is your official role? If you have a contract, what does it say you're expected to do in your contract? If you are part of a department in higher education, or if you're part of a program in adult education, or if we have any P-12 people that are here, if you're in a department in elementary or secondary ed, what is your official role or your job duties with that title? And then I want you to think about this. What do you actually do? What is actually done on a day-to-day basis? And does it align with the official duties laid out in your contract or somewhere that you can refer back to, or something that you were told? I want you to be mindful of these 3 points right here as we proceed with the rest of our talk. What is my position? What is my role in that position? And what do I actually do day to day? This connects with a larger question that we often need to ask ourselves. Moving beyond ourselves, but still staying in our field, what is the role of an ELT educator? Now, just for a point of clarification, I am using the term ELT, English language teaching. You might be ESOL, ESL, EML, whatever term, ELD, there might be a different term that you are officially under. Just to keep everything together, I'm going to use the term ELT throughout the talk here. What is the role of an ELT educator? Think about that right now. Just about 30 seconds. What is the role of an ELT educator? You can jot down ideas.
Do you want people to put things in the chat?
If you want to put things in the chat, you can put things in the chat. That's fine as well. What is the role of an ELT educator? There's about another 10 seconds. Oh, I see one thing in the chat here. Okay, advocate on behalf of cultural linguists. Okay, that's a key word that we will discuss today. It's okay if you didn't put in the chat. I just want you to have some ideas in your mind as we move forward. I wanted to go out and I wanted to find out, what do people think about this term ELT educator? What do people say? So from a very non-research perspective, I went to where most people go to, Google. I typed this in and I said, what is this? What do people say? And this is Google's answer. Teachers of students whose primary language is not English, they teach students to acquire fluency in English reading, writing, speaking, and or listening to meet the student's purposes for learning the language. Straightforward, general, that sounds fine. Now, a lot of my current work is actually with the K-12 system. So I decided to go to a school district's official definition for ELT educators. And they actually don't use the term ELT, they use a different acronym, but for our purposes here, I thought I would use the term ELT and to actually think about, how does the school district define ELT? Well, this person provides instruction for multilingual learners by developing, selecting, and modifying instructional plans and materials and presenting them using specialized techniques that meet the needs of all students. Modifying, specialized, developing, selecting. I'm a discourse analyst, so I like pulling out keywords that I think are interesting. Sounds good. But my question is that all? I work with a lot of teachers in training, administrators, colleagues here at the University of Maryland, and I ask them, can you tell me, what do you think is an ELT educator? What is their role? And I got so many different things to discuss. So I got one person said they are a donation coordinator, a classroom assistant, a parental figure, a peer educator, a traveler from school to school, a policy advocate, a counselor, a refugee expert, an interlingual administrative assistant, an SLA knowledge holder, a linguistic guru, a babysitter, a content co-teacher, a literacy specialist, a workshop leader, etc., etc. I found this fascinating because I could not find in many of the official definitions from school districts, adult education programs, or even higher education TESOL education programs, these types of descriptions. Everything focused on the 4 language skills, everything focused on differentiation, everything focused on second language acquisition. I didn't find a lot of these other things. And when I delved deeper, a lot of people said this comes from on the job. And one word that kept coming up over and over again, which you do not see, well, you see here in certain forms, but that ties this all together is advocacy. We are advocating for our learners in many different ways. But the question is, what do we mean when we say advocacy? So we have the teaching down. Many of us are researchers. But what do we mean by advocacy? So Heather Linville in 2020 said, advocacy for multilingual learners is now an expected role of the ELT teacher. This is 21st century. I can tell you right now, 20 years ago, when I was coming up, becoming a teacher, we did not talk about advocacy at all. There might have been a case study, I think I read, about immigrant families, brand new families coming in. But I was not taught to advocate. I did not even know what that was. And if you take a close look at a lot of the certification requirements in P12, or if you take a close look at the programming in adult ed, you might see this word mentioned, but you don't necessarily see it expanded upon. Advocacy is also working for multilingual learners equitable and excellent education by taking appropriate actions on their behalf. Appropriate actions on their behalf. What does that mean? So in general, this notion of advocacy, especially in 2024, is mentioned everywhere. It's part of who we are. But how does that connect with my role, particularly as a teacher? Well, if we take a very, very general look at research on this topic, and it's expansive in general education, a little less expansive in our field, but it's still there. We see this word connected. Part of being a teacher leader means being an advocate and using our professional expertise to impact transformative change. When someone hears the word advocacy, very often it's connected with the word leader. In talking with many teachers, they wonder, are they leaders? Sonia Nieto, back in 2015, said, any teacher who does advocacy is a leader, is a teacher leader, regardless if you have the title. So Heather Linville is telling us that advocacy needs to be a part of being an ELT teacher. And Sonia Nieto is saying, if you're advocating, you are a leader in your field for your students, for their equity. So advocacy is important. An advocate, if we change the word a little bit, is defined as educators who work for social justice, both inside and outside the classroom. They take action outside the classroom to achieve systemic change. Advocates are transparent, sharing what they do and know. I want to hone in on this right here. Take action outside of the school to achieve systemic change. This is now connecting to policymaking. The second you see the word systemic, we're now talking about educational policy. This means that advocacy includes having a voice in policymaking development, decision-making, and implementation at all levels of policymaking. This is key. This is something we have to take into account. When we're talking about systemic change, policy makes the system. Advocacy is our voice and how that is created and implemented. And in fact, many of the standards in P12 and adult and higher education are now including the word advocacy with ELT, similar to what Heather Linville said just 4 years ago. In fact, if you take a look at the TESOL International Association, their initial K-12 certification standards from 2018 actually says it right here. Candidates must be able to apply knowledge of school, district, and governmental policies and legislation that impact English learners' educational rights in order to advocate for English learners. This is a requirement in order to get certification in K-12, but it is also shown in much adult education standards that are followed. It is also shown in a lot of higher education standards as well. This is not brand new to our field, but how it has been done, and it's been done well, tends to be regulated to certain areas of our field. I have many colleagues who have looked at what we call the practitioner policymaker as advocate, and they have done amazing work. When we have looked at practitioners, teachers, researchers taking part in policy, and the word policy is broad, this is what often has been discussed in our field. Number one, teachers as classroom language policymakers. My colleagues Daisy Fredericks and Doris Werner have talked about this a lot, particularly with their work in Arizona, focusing on refugees, newcomers who are refugees, and how teachers and students are maneuvering through the restrictiveness of English only in Arizona, and how they're coming up with classroom language policies for what can be used and why can be used. Fascinating work. This has been done throughout the United States. There's also work on how teachers and administrators work with families, not just in helping them to develop a family language policy at home, but also for them to just become aware of what is your family language policy? Is it just naturally the home language? Is it a mixture of something? Are certain things home language? Are certain things English? Getting people just to be aware of their family language policy making is something that's very important, because we all know the importance of first language knowledge being able to help with additional language acquisition. What's going on at home? Just being aware of what we're doing is very powerful. There are also many other people that have looked at how educators, again, I use that term very loosely to represent all of those people who affect our multilingual learners' academic success, have been able to influence policymaking at the school level, in K-12 at the school district level, as well as some people who've been able to affect policy changes with state departments of education. So for example, in Maryland, we have something called COMAR, which is the Code of Maryland Regulations, of which educational policy is built. I believe in Georgia, it's the educational rules that guide P-12. I'm not sure. I think I've heard that before. How can we influence that? How can we influence certification policies? Fantastic. State departments of education in Maryland, the Department of Labor oversees all adult education program. How can we influence how they come up with their standards in the state of Maryland, for example? This is all very important and radical and forward-thinking. My colleague, Peter DaCosta from Michigan, has worked on this extensively with regards to dual language programming. But what about this? Many of those policies, classroom, family not so much, but definitely state departments of education, school districts, schools, all of those policies come from somewhere else. What are our direct connections to policymaking and the law at state and federal levels as educators? Not many people have looked at educators and their direct connections to this. And when I say educators, I mean people on the ground. I mean all of you here. I mean myself. People who are on the ground, everyday teachers, researchers in the field. I'm not talking about people who are presidents of unions or anything. I'm talking about everyday people. What is our direct connection to this type of policymaking? Well, listen, here's the situation. The fact of the matter is this, is that stakeholders in education, for example, teachers, we are all affected by policies and laws from the state and federal levels. All of us, regardless if you are P-12, adult, or higher education. We are all affected by this. But we are often not empowered to play an active role in policymaking because we are often pigeonholed into what Marshall, Gerstle, Pippin, and Johnson say is our quote-unquote social class. We are questioned about whether we possess power, legitimacy, and urgency in being able to do policy or law creation and implementation. These factors have led us to believe that we are outside of policymaking and law creation, or we are on a lower rung of the hierarchy of power. So most educators are not inclined to be part of this type of policymaking and advocacy. I think that's problematic. I think that we are one of the most powerful resources and voices in policymaking. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Let's consider this. Why do others feel that way about educators? And why do educators feel that way about themselves? Often. I don't want to generalize and say everyone feels this way. In fact, everyone doesn't, but many people do. Well, the first question we have to ask ourselves is this. Does the policy-making / law creation system even allow me in? Am I even able to get in? There's been a lot of work in educational policy. I'm not going to go in depth because that's not the purpose of today's talk. Today's talk is a practical approach, not an in-depth knowledge of policy theory. But there are two policy-making perspectives that have infiltrated educational policy, and specifically policy regarding multilingual learners. There is something called rational choice theory and something called cultural process theory. Rational choice theory believes in three things. Number one, humans are rational beings. Number two, institutional regulations influence human behavior. And number three, we seek to change institutional rules to affect others' actions. We don't change the other people, we change the institution. The institution will ultimately affect how others change themselves. Everything is done through specific assigned roles at specific stages. Certain things are done at the proposal stage. Certain things are done at the examination stage. Certain things are done at the implementation stage. Certain things are done for evaluation, and certain things are done, if necessary, for termination. It sounds a lot like education. Those of you who've experienced higher education, gone through a graduate program, are graduate faculty, have experience going through a degree or a certification program. Very much based on rational choice theory. In this way, we expect things to be rational. So we don't necessarily take into account real life or anecdotal situations. Let's contrast this with cultural process theory. With this perspective of policymaking, it's all about identifying the behaviors, norms, perceptions of people in the situation, the people who are part of, influence, and are affected by the situation. So it's looking from within. It's very bottom up. We have to understand the values that are currently in place, and the value shifts in contexts and populations. These shifts occur when the key actors change. In other words, when populations change, when situations change. Have you experienced over the course of your career changes in students in your classrooms? Changes in their knowledge of their home language, changes in why they are here. Particularly in the last 4 years, the United States has seen this. I know Maryland is one of the top states where we have seen a drastic change in our multilingual learner population, particularly in P12, since 2018, due to various worldwide factors. Things change. Things are not static. All key actors should be part of policymaking because they have the inside knowledge. There is the importance of network creation. We don't work in isolation. We must create a network and be able to make connections among our roles within a network in order to lead towards policy creation. Now, how does this all connect to educators? Well, if we look at the two side by side, from a rational choice theory perspective, we are the policy implementors. We don't create policy, we implement the policy as told from the guidelines that we are given. Cultural process theory says that we are part of the policy community in terms of development. We are one of the key actors in the education network that's here. Both of these play a role in policymaking in the United States, in Georgia, in Maryland, in wherever, in state departments of education. We just need to be aware of who are we talking to and what setting are we within. But we also need to think back and think, why should I bother doing that? I have been trained in SLA. I have been trained in PSYOP. I have been trained in ESP for business. That's not my role. Well, that knowledge of teaching and research can actually be very, very influential for policymaking. Last April, I was the keynote for the TESOL International Association's virtual conference. And during that time, I made an important point to all of the attendees. All teachers are leaders, reiterating Sonia Nieto's idea. But to be a leader and to be an advocate and to be a policymaker, we need to think very carefully about who we are. We are the experts because we know what is happening day to day in our classroom. We know firsthand who the multilingual learner populations are and how they are changing. We know firsthand the short and long-term ramifications of current policy. We are the experts of second language acquisition, best practices, intercultural communication, the English language and linguistic system, etc. Go back to your certification or degree requirements. You had to know this information. You had to be experts of this information to get your degree, to get your certification, to continue your on-the-job experience. You have to know this information. With that alone, you have the validity behind you for policymaking. And again, it is clear in 2024, we are expected to be advocates. Part of advocacy is taking part in policymaking. But how do I do this? This past week, I was collecting data for a completely separate research project that I'm on. And I have IRB, so I'm able to actually share this information. It was an interview I was having with this one participant. And this participant said something, I was like, wow, you're right. And I told this participant, can I use this in my talk tonight? Direct quote. We're told to advocate, but we're not given a step-by-step on how to do so. We have to figure it out ourselves. Our supervisors tell us, go advocate. Maybe in our TESOL master's program, advocacy is important. We have to advocate. What does that mean? This is where the second part of my title comes in, the practical approach. Advocacy as it relates to policymaking is something that can be very practical. Not necessarily easy, but very practical. And it actually incorporates a lot of the skills we already possess as ELT educators. First, there's a couple of preliminary bits of work that we need to think about if we're planning on doing this. First thing we have to do is we have to self-reflect. Who am I? Why am I in this field? What brought me into this field? What is my belief about the language learning process? What lived experiences influence why I believe this? Was it my own language learning experiences, my familial experiences, living abroad, my experiences at a specific school, my experiences during my educational period? A combination of all of them. Why do I believe that? This is important because this can help address why do I think something needs changing? Why do I think I need to go more in depth than what I do already? Start looking within before you do anything else. Why do I think this isn't working? Why do I think these assessments or the way we do accountability is not succeeding? Look inward first. After that, go directly to the source. Just as much as we need to be part of policymaking at all levels, so do our students, because it's about them. What do your students think of their learning situations? Do they think there is something inequitable that needs to be changed? Go to the source. Does that align with you and your self-reflection? Or is it something you never even thought about? And then I would task you to go back and think, why did I not think about this? Why did I continue doing this? And I had no idea that this was inequitable. Why would I not be aware of that? These are such important questions to think about. Then step 3, preliminary work. We haven't even gotten into the actual policy making yet. This is all preliminary. This is all preliminary. Talk with your colleagues. And when I say colleagues, I don't just mean people in your building. I mean colleagues across the state through Georgia TESOL, across the states, around the world. We are a very international field. Talk to your colleagues. Are they noticing or hearing similar things? Do their backgrounds, experiences, beliefs align with yours or not? And if they don't, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It means we need to expand our understanding of the field. Having said all of this, this is all what I'm calling preliminary work. There are entities out there that have published things that we can do towards policymaking, and I'm calling those things that have been around for the past 10 years or so a good start. It's a very good start. The National Education Association, for example, in 2015, came up with a set of stages that we should go through if we're going to be advocating towards this level. Number 1, they say we should isolate the issue, and you can use some of the information from the preliminary work that I just described to help isolate the issue. Identify who your allies are. Use your knowledge of multilingual learner policy history and current rights to understand how we are where we are today. Organize and educate others, and identify outlets for change. So do I want to go to the State Department of Education? Do I want to connect with a lawmaker? Do I want to take it to the media? Do I want to bring it to my chair? Do I want to bring it to a committee at the university? What do I want to do? This is great. This is a great start, but it's a start. It's a start. Another colleague of mine, Margarita Gomez here in Maryland, who with her colleague Leah Sal, went a step further and said, we're going to give you guidelines to meet elected officials, to get in their ear. Again, it goes a little bit further, a little more specific than what I previously mentioned. So they say there are 3 stages. Number 1, there's things you have to do before you meet elected officials. So educate yourself further on the issue and its context, and clearly identify what you want to ask them to change, what they call the ask or your ask. What are you asking for? I always tell people 10 seconds. That's all you get. Explain what needs to be changed in 10 seconds. That's it, because that's all the attention span you're going to get. So that needs to be done long before you meet with any elected officials prior. Number 2, you want to identify and build multiple stakeholders and allies. Who can help you with this? Who has connections with different people? Number 3, they also say schedule meetings with elected officials and their team. And they actually give a website you can go to meet your federal elected officials. During the actual meeting, they talk about introductions with your official titles, bring in any personal stories, share personal testimony, and get to the ask. Continue discussions, bring questions, and always thank them and reinforce that thank you so much for agreeing to support blah, blah, blah. Afterwards, they talk about after the meeting, debrief with your group of allies and do a thank you letter again, reiterating thank you so much for this. This goes a step beyond the previous group, and this is fantastic. But again, this separates the educator from the actual potential policymaking vis-a-vis law creation. We're still leaving it to the others to handle the actual policy. I want to go beyond, and I am now going to give you an exemplar for how educators can directly be part of the entire law creation process. And the exemplar I'm going to discuss right now is Maryland's Credit for All Language Learning, otherwise known as CALL Act. Now, the acronym CALL, you might have seen elsewhere in TESOL. We're not referring to computer-assisted language learning. This is just an acronym for the name of the act. And this was a true grassroots movement that led to law creation for multilingual learner academic equity at the community college level. Like most states, community colleges offer ESOL courses at various levels. But regardless if it's a beginner ESL course that's more of a community program or something that's directly connected to academic programs that are much more advanced, aside from California and Rhode Island, every other state gives these courses for 0 credits. That's just how it is. Even advanced English for specific purposes courses that are directly connected to Accounting 101, Biology 101, directly connected to the content areas, they're still 0 credits. But students have to pay the same tuition. Students have the same amount, if not more, work to do. Some of these are the equivalent to a 6-credit course in the amount of work that they have to do. And for many of them, they're not even allowed to start their more advanced major courses until they have completely passed out of ESOL. So this led to many people dropping out because they could not afford it, led people to drop out because they were taking semesters of not just introductory, but advanced ESOL coursework at community colleges for no credit, and they couldn't continue going that way. And it led to a lot of people not being able to go into their field. So what the CALL Act ultimately showed was it requires a public community college to consider a course or program for ESL, or English language learners, as eligible for world language or humanities credit towards an associate's degree, as long as the course is not considered remedial. If you take a look at some of these advanced courses, like I mentioned, English for specific purposes for business, English for specific purposes for travel tourism, advanced English writing. If you compare what is expected of our multilingual learners compared to monolingual English learners taking Spanish 101, it blows the Spanish 101 courses out of the water in terms of what is expected. Yet, Spanish 101 is 3 credits. Advanced ESOL, 0. This changed that. Number 2, it also requires that all of those courses be eligible for transfer to public institutions of higher education. So me at the University of Maryland, we have to accept that for transfer. This was grassroots. This started because community college students, multilingual learners, complained to their ESOL professors. Why are we not getting credit for this extensive course when our other monolingual English learner friends are getting 3 credits for French 101, Spanish 101, Chinese 101, and the requirements are much less rigorous? It started with grassroots. The community college faculty, with the community college students, then started to build a coalition. And here are just some of the types of people that are part of the coalition. Community college faculty, current and former students, nonprofits got involved, such as Maryland Latinos Unidos, union reps, elected officials and staff, which I'll explain in a minute. TESOL field experts, I was considered one of them. Language Teacher Association representatives, media representatives, the ACLU. We were able to make connections with all of these people to say, hey, something needs to be done about this. Here are some of the people that were part of that. This is from last month. We were part of the opening panel for the TESOL International Association's Advocacy Action Days. And these were some of the people who were part of the coalition towards this, talking last month. And you can see here, people from all different backgrounds, different parts, different experiences being part of this. A key thing, though, was finding the bill's sponsors. And this was something that was very important. These were the 2 sponsors from the Maryland House Delegate Jared Solomon. From the Maryland Senate, Senator Malcolm Augustine. We were very specific in who we contacted, and specifically whose staff we contacted. What was important was, number one, who in both areas focused on education. And number two, who in both the House and the Senate, not just focused on education, but had a very large immigrant population that this would directly affect. It was important to make these connections with the elected officials, but it was also important to find people who took more of a cultural process theory perspective to policymaking, as opposed to being strict rational choice theory perspectives, who wanted and welcomed all of these people to be part of the process. Here is a sampling of what was done. We organized and led and were part of town halls. We gave government testimony, both oral and written, at both the Maryland House and the Maryland Senate. We wrote op-eds in all different publications. We circulated petitions to get key people to sign up to support this. Extensive media coverage, podcasts, radio programs, TV spots, online, YouTube, everywhere. Lots of work with social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, just getting the word out there, and also participating in legislative advocacy nights. Here are some brief examples of what we did, and I'm just going to stop share right now so that I can actually show you some of the things that were done. Here's an example of us connecting with local media. So you can see these were local radio stations. And we have this right here from February. New Maryland bill gives credit to multilingual students for English learning courses. I just want you to listen to the 1-minute blurb that was played on radio stations across the state, just to get people's ears out to hear what was going on. So let's just take a quick listen.
State legislators are considering a bill that would give credit to multilingual community college students for their English classes and guarantee transfer of those credits to all four-year colleges. WYPR's Bree Hatch has more on the details.
Maria Cespedes Chavez is studying to be a nurse at the Community College of Baltimore County, but she spent her first year taking English courses that didn't count towards her major.
Feels like I was running a marathon. And then when I get to the end, they're like, no, you need to run again because that one didn't count.
Cespedes Chavez said she spent money and time overcoming a barrier native speakers don't have.
Like if you're born with English, you already have a basic skill that everybody should have. And if you need to learn English, you're like already behind. Like everybody is one step ahead of you.
Advocates say this bill will boost graduation rates for multilingual students. The state's Independent College Association said the bill needs to allow more flexibility for private institutions. Bree Hatch, WYPR News.
This was one example of just getting out there. Another example, which I will just briefly share with all of you, was right here, where we actually presented in front of the Maryland House of Representatives Appropriations Committee. I'm not going to play this whole thing, but I'm going to play just a little part of what the bill was and just get a sense of everyone that was up here was either a faculty member or a former community college multilingual learner student.
569, Delegate Solomon. Thank you. I'd like to call up our panel here. So if they're with me, I'd like to call up Owen Andrews, nurses from.
They advance from dual enrolled high school students, central to the success of the blueprint, to our community colleges, central to the upskilling of labor our state's economy so dearly needs, to our private and public universities, Maryland's engines of research and pathway to the professional class. The CALL Act sets right a longstanding wrong. It won't cost a dime and will likely save taxpayers on federal and state college aid while accelerating multilingual students into the workforce.
Thank you.
Please make the right call for our students and pass this bill.
Thank you.
Dear Chairman and members of the Appropriation Committee, for the records, my name is Maricruz Abarca, and I am here today to testify in favor of the CALL Act HB 569. Having relocated to Maryland from New Jersey in December of 2013, I was initially captivated by the promise that this state was offering for me, my ex-husband at that time, and my soon-to-be twins, and my son, who was at that time 10. So, however, I soon realized that unlocking those opportunities was required mastering the language. So in 2016, facing all the challenges of going through my divorce and the linguistic barriers, I decided to retake my educational life. While juggling the responsibility of taking care of my twins, who were at that time 2 years old, my son, who was 10, diagnosed with ADHD. So for many of you, it was easier, but for me, trying to get my associate's degree, trying to pay for my children's food and my housing without any other opportunity, because when you don't dominate the language, you are facing everything on top of those. So at this point, all that I want to say is that those who know me, you know all that I have been through to succeed in life. Currently, I hold a master's degree. And all that I can say is that this could have saved me from spending nights in the darkness without BG&E, electricity. Because why? Because I wanted to succeed. I wanted a better life for my children. So in conclusion, I ask you to please support this opportunity and make Maryland a better place for all. Thank you.
So just a couple of samples. You don't need to hear my my testimony there because you're hearing me talk right now. But these are just a couple of samples of how different people were able to connect with changing the laws. And aside from me, I've actually presented 4 times in front of the various legislative bodies at this point. No one else on that panel, and there were 3 other people after us that also presented. No one else had ever presented in that type of arena before. All faculty or former students. And they were very surprised at how smoothly it went. And they never even considered doing something like that. I'm aware
So
of
Drew,
time.
I hate to interrupt you. We've got like 5 minutes
Yep,
left. So
I'm
and
aware
then I
of
want to
time.
get to a little bit to Q of A. So I just wanted to keep you
Yep.
on time.
I'm gonna go over all of this. We can skip over the legislature timeline. Here you can see the CALL Act was passed, and this is the day that it was actually signed into law. There I am. There are a bunch of other people, a lot of students that were affected by this, and this was the final vote, 135-1. So why do I bring this up? Again, advocates achieve systemic change outside of the school. We are policymakers at all levels. We have the validity from our lived experiences to be part of policymaking directly. The knowledge from our formal and informal educational experiences. We are educators. We have drive already. We have passion. We have dedication. We are educators. That's part of who we are. And as educators, we also have the know-how for putting things together from scratch. We deal with that daily by being teachers, paraprofessionals, assistants, etc. And we also have the ability to make connections, allies, and coalitions. So, who should be part of macro policymaking? All of us. Our voices are the start of change. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. If you came in late, you can get the QR code for all of the references as well as more information about myself right here. And here is my email. And with that, questions?
Great. So thank you so much. I found that, probably speak for everybody, but I found that really inspirational, and thinking about the ways that we can actually, sometimes I know it's easy to get in that mindset of, well, I can't really change anything, but, really getting out of that mindset and seeing that we can make important changes. So, I think we had, but also if you want to unmute yourself or put your question in the chat, there was a couple questions kind of in the chat about what if, like, where somebody may have like their heart in the right place, but where the people that are supposed to be our allies are actually kind of, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it sabotaging, but necessarily undermining the efforts that we're trying to do. And what advice would you, or suggestions would you have for people in that situation?
This might sound counterintuitive. Again, there's that old saying, you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. Here, you want a large coalition because you want to hear different perspectives. And if you do have that one or two people who are part of that, it's also an issue of validity. They will be called out for. And the question will be, why are they feeling that way, or why are they not? That's also going back to a bit of the preliminary work that I mentioned earlier. You need to talk with your colleagues early on to get a sense of where are they coming from. So, for example, with this coalition, we were very strategic in who was brought in based on that prior knowledge of who does what, who believes in what, where is that coming from? And that's something which was very important. Again, some people might be able to slip through the cracks and be a little bit sabotagey in that way, but that's where having a larger group to really decide on the future direction can be helpful. Yes, having a large group does have its drawbacks. To make cooks in the kitchen, that could be an issue. But if you're talking about someone who might be having a different perspective or trying to infiltrate or sabotage, we did not have that issue. But if you do have that issue, then the numbers do help to counteract that.
So Dr. Fagan, that came from me. And I'm really curious, as in, I believe WIDA as an organization is harming learners at the moment in Georgia. So I don't know how to, I guess, fight that fight.
Now, that's a great point. If I may interject right there. The question number one would be, why do you feel it's harming? And let's go back to self-reflection. Where are you getting these ideas from? If you're saying, well, I have anecdotal evidence from my students, but how do you know it's harming them? You use the word harm. I want to know your own background. Where is that coming from? If you can't do intensive self-reflection, then it's not going to work. And that's step one. Every single person that we brought to the coalition, we said, okay, what are your beliefs and why? You gave a very powerful word. So I would like to see a little bit more about that. Number two, what's important is to also get from your students' perspectives. What do they think? Particularly if you have people who have graduated. It's always good to actually start with people who've graduated. So Marie Cruz, who you saw was on the panel, the one who was describing her experience 10 years ago, it was easy to get information from her because she was not directly being impacted by administrators or things like that. That was very helpful to get their perspectives. I would always go to graduates to see, tell me more about your experience with this. Being a good researcher, not biasing them, but trying to get their background about that. Number three, you do have to talk to your colleagues. It sounds like you might not be in isolation with feeling this, but where are your colleagues coming from? If they're saying, oh, the same thing, give me more than that. Give me more. What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? What are they knowing? You might also have colleagues who have different perspectives and are arguing about different components of WIDA. This is where you have to like build the foundation. And that's something which is important, but it's really starting with yourself and really.
Because I got the Reading League on board.
Okay, well, the Reading League of Georgia or the National Reading League?
National. The problem.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
It's just, I feel like WIDA is such a big, it's a place I can't crack, and we're really trying hard to crack it, but I don't know who else to. I mean, this is a longer conversation, but I love how you said first look within. I did all the steps, check. It's just who can we work with more to be like, hey, WIDA, you gotta do X, Y, Z.
I think we should talk offline about this, but who I would suggest you contact the states who are not WIDA states. New York,
California.
California.
Who else?
Why? Why are they not WIDA states?
Exactly.
Why? That's why I would say, again, WIDA, if you're going to be watching this, no, just answering a question. But I'm not sure what they're saying, but I'm just answering. But that would be my suggestion. That would be my suggestion. What were the reasonings behind that? Because you might find that looking within yourself and doing that analysis, there might be alignment.
Because right now in Georgia, a lot of teachers are they don't understand the issue that's happening, and when I bring about the issue, they're like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody else have any really quick questions before we conclude?
I just want to ask, I'm Melissa Martin. I'm in Cobb County and I am an ESOL teacher. And I wondered if there is an ESOL parent action committee trickling down.
I can't speak for Georgia, but we actually are planning something for that similar in Maryland. I'm not a part of that, but that's something which is important. I'll let Georgia colleagues do that, but I'm glad you asked that question.
Brian, do you want to tell her about the advocacy group?
Oh yeah, so we have so it actually is kind of interesting. It started at last year's Georgia TESOL conference that we had Laura Grace Ferris and I think of one or two other people that really kind of got interested. And I know Dr. Terrell went, I think it was last summer that you went to Washington, D.C. about advocacy. Yeah, I think it was you two that kind of sort of got that started and sort of, and then gave a presentation at the conference about sort of advocacy and what they kind of been doing and kind of, encouraging other colleagues to go like about advocacy. And that really kind of shot off like a rocket. So we really have different constituency groups in that are advocacy, different stakeholder populations that we're looking at. Like, for example, I'm sort of in charge of the, I guess you might say, the subgroup on bilingualism and dual language and sort of that. So, and so we're kind of gaining ground. We're actually doing writing for each of our sort of sub advocacy groups where we're starting to kind of get the ground rolling by doing white papers. So identifying kind of what our vision and our mission are and where do we want to go. And so we're in the process of kind of working on that. So I guess, Dr. Chiasm might go over more information, but I might say kind of stay tuned. That's definitely something in development, but is really kind of going like gangbusters.
And Miss Martin, what I would love, if you're interested in making that area in advocacy, if you want to come and join us and be part of the team, we'd love to have you. Oh, I can't hear you, but I see smiles, so I'm happy.
Yeah, she's muted, but
I'll just add that also Laura Grace took a group to the Georgia State House back in February or March, I believe it was, to on Page Day or something like that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
yeah. So there's movement on our end. There's a lot to do in Georgia with all the interesting policies that have come down over the last year or two. So we need all involved. Yes.
Great. So thank you again, Dr. Fagan. So just a couple of sort of short housekeeping things. So if you'd like, please, if you scan the QR code, we'd love to have your feedback on this session. Not only to get feedbacks on the session, so to improve these sessions moving forward, but also for your certificate of participation. So we have a couple upcoming sessions in September. So the 12th is to be determined. The 26th, of what to look for in multilingual learning walks. So the idea of for like principals or administrators going around schools and doing like learning walks, kind of seeing what's going on in the classrooms, focusing specifically on multilingual learners of English. So, and gathering, how do you gather information effectively about what's going on in those classrooms? So a presentation for that. And last but not least, my slide will slide will advance. On September 30th was rescheduled. Dr. Deborah Suarez, who's the president of Georgia TESOL International, will be giving a session as well. So definitely you stay tuned for that.
And one more thing, our annual conference is coming up. I couldn't find a flyer
Dare I
for
forget.
to add to the slides, but our conference is coming up. You should see something about registration either via email or on Facebook, or I should say on Facebook or social media in some way. So be looking for that information so that you can get signed up as soon as possible. Okay.
And although I'm not the conference chair this year, I do want to say that the program will be out by the end of this weekend in full capacity. So we'll know exactly everything.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Brian, Dr. Hibbs.